I'm in my second year of the PhD program in civil engineering. We're working on a way to reinforce materials commonly used in the aerospace industry. They're called composite materials. They end up finding their way onto aircraft and spacecraft. Safety is obviously huge there, so they want that material to be very strong and very durable. We use two different chemicals, we mix them together, and then we need a heat source, so we use a microwave, and that activates the chemical process. So we're using a novel material called carbon nanotubes to make the bond between these composite materials stronger, and that in turn makes it more durable in the long run as well.
1985, a Pacific lionfish is first spotted off the south coast of Florida by local fishermen. 1992, Hurricane Andrew hits, decimating South Florida, destroying an aquarium and releasing 6 more lionfish into the water. From these few individuals, lionfish have spread throughout the U.S. eastern seaboard, Caribbean Sea, and Gulf of Mexico, beginning the worst marine invasion in recorded history. My dissertation research indicates that lionfish may in fact be exhibiting those final 2 attributes as well. So while it looks like lionfish are here to stay, harming our reefs, injuring divers, and reproducing uncontrollably, our only hope is that the fiercest predator of all, humans, develop a taste for them. Thank you.
This year, I was accepted as an emerging fashion designer for Birmingham Fashion Week. It was fun and exhilarating, especially being on the stage as a designer. But after the show, when I got back to my daily routine, I realized that there were other aspects of the fashion which are not so glorious. My locker was jam-packed with the leftover scraps of fabrics from my designs because 10 to 20% of the initial fabric bought for a design is wasted in cutting process. I'm a master's student in the clothing and textiles. My bachelor's computer engineering, which is kind of different from my master, but because I had a kind of passion about it. My thesis is designing garments without waste, because 10 to 20% of the fabric is wasted in cutting process, and I believe that fabric is precious, so we don't have to waste fabric. And then for my thesis, I'm using a software called Optitex, which is we put all the patterns of the fabric of the garments, and then we can see that how many % of the fabric is wasted. And then kind of we can manipulate it in different ways to use the fabric more efficiently.
For me, there was no doubt about working in the educational system or working with children, either whether it was directly or indirectly. And the more I learned more about myself and means to combat injustices, it kind of all fit together. I hypothesized that the more African American parents were involved in their child's special education processes, the less satisfied they would be. As opposed to Caucasian parents, the more involved they were, the more satisfied they would be. There's this notion called disproportionality, and that's where minority children have a greater likelihood of being diagnosed with intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, sometimes, unnecessarily, and that's discriminatory when you think about it. Like why are these children? And studies have shown that even in school systems that are predominantly white and that have very, very low percentages of African American children, the percentage of African American children in special education was very high in comparison to their white peers.
Not so long ago, our government approved $8.6 billion to be spent restoring the Florida Everglades. Now, that seems like a pretty big price tag, but if you stop and think about it, there's lots of reasons why the Everglades should be preserved. But a term that might not as readily come to mind is carbon dynamics. That's what my research is on, and hopefully by the end of my talk, I'll convince all of you that it's one more reason the Everglades are important. What my research does is it takes a whole bunch of data from 2 different sites in the Florida Everglades, where we're constantly just tracking measurement changes in both CO2 concentrations and methane concentrations. So we can actually see how much is either going into the environment or how much is being released into the atmosphere. The reason this is important is because carbon in the atmosphere is a greenhouse gas.
My name is Jordan Rippey. I'm a PhD student in accounting, My dissertation research has to do with whether or not the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, does a good job of reviewing the filings of public companies and helping them follow the rules more appropriately.
I have identified an anomaly whereby I believe that some firms may be using an inappropriate accounting practice to manipulate their reported earnings, a practice we call earnings management. Now, accounting rules say that if your inventory declines in value for any reason, you have to write it down to reflect that it isn't worth as much as you first thought. For example, let's say that this picture above represents Walmart's stockpile of the iPhone 6, but now that the new model has been released, they can't sell those old phones for as much as they first thought. But instead of taking the write-down like the rules say, we see that some firms are using a special account to avoid it.